Last week, I did my biggest experiment yet. I made 5 different pizzas using 5 different dough recipes. And what I learned was the Poolish recipe that I've created tasted better than any other recipe that I've done. And by far. Wasn't even close. It tasted better. My Poolish recipe is just overnight cold ferment. And it tasted better than even the 5-day ferment dough ball. So I'm experimenting more with Poolish. Today's experiment, what I did was increase the Poolish ratio in the dough. So for example, my stock Poolish recipe uses 30% Poolish by water weight. So one dough ball that makes a 12-inch pizza uses 100 milliliters of water. 30 milliliters of that 100 milliliters I put in the Poolish in the starter, and that water weight is always matched with the flour weight. So my Poolish starter is 30 milliliters of water, 30 grams of flour, and then the yeast and sugar. And by the way, all these ingredients, recipes are going to be in the course or the video description. And so I wanted to see what would happen if I increased the Poolish ratio to something higher. So I looked it up. Bakerpedia.com says you can have up to 60% weight of Poolish in a recipe. I didn't want to quite go to that extreme, so I tried 50%. I've heard of guys doing 50% in Poolish and thought that that'd be a good number anyways. I took 50 milliliters of water and 50 grams of flour, and then the yeast and the sugar, made Poolish out of it, let it rest overnight in the fridge, took it out, and then added the remaining 50 milliliters of water and the rest of flour and salt and olive oil the next day. And I compared it to my stock Poolish recipe of 30% Poolish. And when I did this, I was assuming 2 things. I was assuming, number one, that the 50% Poolish would have more gas bubbles in it, the more bubbly, airy rim. And then number 2, I was assuming that it would actually taste better because the Poolish is what gives, the dough the incredible flavor. And so when I started to shape the 50% Poolish dough ball, as you can see here, there were in fact these huge gas bubbles, bigger than I thought. They're massive, and actually I don't like these at all, because what happens is if you shape the pizza and leave these big gas bubbles there, then when you put it in the oven, they get charred really, really fast because the exterior of that bubble is such a thin layer of dough. It just burns up in the heat and it just becomes a big black ball. So normally you just pop the bubbles and let them go down. But then the problem is when you do that, then that part of the crust, that part of the rim is going to look like flat and compressed, wrinkly, like it does right here. See where there's that wrinkly spot? That's from the biggest air bubble that I popped. So I don't love these big air bubbles. I ate both of them, comparing the 50% one to the 30% one. And surprisingly, my second assumption, it was wrong. I couldn't taste the difference at all. They're both really flavorful. They're both really good. And the 50% Poolish one did not taste any different than the 30% Poolish. So that's the result of my experiment. I'm going to stick with a 30% Poolish myself just because it's just as flavorful and it's not quite as, it's just not as annoying with those great big bubbles. I mean, you can see overall the 50% Poolish did have a little bit more airy rim, which is nice, but it's just not worth it to deal with those wrinkles in the rim. So that's what I learned. Hope it helps. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you.